Welcome to today's episode of Fly to Freedom. If you're a regular listener, welcome back, and I'm so grateful to have you here. If you're a new listener, I extend a huge welcome to you. I'm Julia. I started this podcast actually an entire year ago. This is episode number 53. So there's been 52 whole episodes since I first started. And when I first started, I was a fairly new coach, and I had myself recovered from 40 years of living in various eating disorders, mainly anorexia, but there was also several periods of orthorexia and a lot of exercise addiction as well. And when I recovered, my life changed so much. And I felt just compelled almost to share the fact that recovery is possible for anyone, and it is literally life-changing. It's so worth it. You go from existing to living, and I just wanted to share my experience, invite other people to share their experiences, and help as many people as possible find this incredible life on the other side of an eating disorder. So in the last year, I've gone from no listeners whatsoever when I first started to being ranked number 3 out of the top eating disorder recovery podcasts on FeedSpot online. So thank you all so much for tuning in week after week. And I just want to celebrate this moment with everybody here because I'm so proud of where this podcast has gone and the feedback I get, the people that contact me and say that it helps and they feel heard and they feel recognized and they feel hope. And that's incredible. So thank you all for being a part of this. And I would also love to ask where you would like to see this podcast go forwards from here. Are there any particular types of guests you would like me to have on? Are there any subjects that you would like me to cover? Questions you would like to ask? Would any of you like to come and have a coaching session on the podcast? I'm here to give you the help and information that you want and need. So please contact me and let me know what you'd like to see or hear on this podcast going forwards. So today's episode is about how to find your strength. And there are different parts of us. I like to think of it like we are the cast of a stage show, just one person, and you've got so many different members of this cast within you. And often within eating disorders, there's one or two main characters, and the rest of the cast don't really get much of a look in. So if you think about what different aspects of self you have, or which different aspects of self you have, I invite you to grab a pen and a piece of paper or a journal and start jotting down the different parts of yourself that are there. And we all have many, many parts. So for me, there is the scared self, the inner child, the one that feels unsure and sometimes unworthy or sometimes not good enough. And that was very much the overwhelming player in my stage show during the eating disorder was the scared self. And she took center stage. She was leading the way and had the main role. And I was scared of everything. I was literally living life afraid and unworthy and not good enough. And I did not know how to get out of that. And the next biggest part that was playing in my life during the eating disorder was the bully, the meanie, the inner critic. And she used to tell me that I was rubbish and that I had to perform all these different behaviors to be good enough. I had to be as thin as possible. I had to eat as little as possible, and that anything else wasn't acceptable. And that even though I obeyed all the rules of the bully, I still wasn't acceptable and I still wasn't good enough. So the bully, the inner critic, for me, was really, really mean, cruel, unpleasant, and unable to please her, really. Then there was the loving, compassionate part of me, and she was there. She was very definitely there. And she did have a role in my life, but that love and compassion was for other people, always. For my children, for my friends. I would do anything for anyone else. And alongside the loving and compassionate part of me was the people-pleasing part of me. And she was like the loving and compassionate part's best friend, along with, well, there was a trio. There was the perfectionistic self as well. She was in there. And so these parts played a role, and they were part of my stage show. But there were other parts of me as well, and there are other parts of you. So do start writing down which parts of you there are. Is there a creative self? I used to love to bake and create different recipes. And yes, that was a huge part of the eating disorder and being around food because I was so starved. But it was also a creative part of me where I made up new recipes and loved to fuse different flavors together and create different cakes and stuff. And then there's the rational part, the rational self. She's a lot more present nowadays. She only had bit parts in my life in the eating disorder. She didn't really make much of an appearance, maybe to help other people, but not for myself, because the scared self was literally leading the show. Other parts of me that I've identified are the adult, who rarely made an appearance, actually, back then, if I'm honest. My inner child, my scared self, was very definitely the main part, and my adult self was not showing up for me at all. But she is now, and she is very definitely a part of me now. And there's my parenting self, who, when I was in the eating disorder, I thought, well, that was because I was a mum. I am a mum. I have sons. And so she was very present for them, but not for me and not for my inner child. And that's a point that I'm going to come back to, but it's a really, really important point, okay? Then there's my stroppy self, the angry self, who actually, when I was, well, for years actually, I was afraid to have an angry part, an angry part of myself. And I suppressed and disassociated from the angry part of me. And it's taken a lot of work and a lot of healing to find that part of myself, because it's human nature to have anger as an emotion, and it's actually can be a really productive emotion. It can be an emotion that spurs you forwards and motivates you to change things that aren't working for you. There was the fun and playful self, who didn't really exist at all. She virtually played no part in my life at all until the last couple of years. And honestly, she's out to play all the time now. She absolutely loves her part in my life, and I try and have fun and play as much as possible. And then there is the shadow self, the sort of self that comes with shame, and the self we repress and deny, and we don't like to acknowledge the thoughts we have and that part of ourselves. And it's when we allow ourselves to notice the shadow self and acknowledge that she's there, and acknowledge that we all have these darker thoughts, these thoughts that we feel shame about. It took me a long time to acknowledge that one of the things that actually held me in the eating disorder for so long was part of my shadow self, was that I wanted to feel cared for by other people. So part of me enjoyed being sick, because then I was looked after. I was the tiny person that people wanted to protect because I was small and I was not well, really. And part of me didn't want to give that up when I recovered, because I felt cared for, and I felt loved from that. And that's actually really common, and we all have things we don't like to admit about ourselves, and that's normal. So acknowledging the shadow self is really important. But the self I would like you to really look at the moment is the curious self. And I would like you to bring the curious self to the center of the stage and start asking yourself different questions about which part of you is running the show. Who has the biggest part? Who is the lead role? And what can you do about that? So we are literally, say there was 10 parts of you. There's, how many have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm going to go 10 because it's easier to calculate, but there's many, many parts of ourselves. So the scared self, who was running the show, who had the lead role in my life, was less than 10% of who I am. Yet I was giving her probably 70% of my headspace, of the time of my life, really. And then the bully had probably 25% and was making the scared self, the inner child, even more scared. And then the rest probably only had 5%. And that's not a balance, obviously. So when you're looking for your strength and you look at all these different parts of you, you can see that you actually have the strength inside you already. And like my loving and compassionate self was there, and she was active and she played a role, but she didn't play it towards myself. I needed to allow her, that loving self, the compassionate self, to look after my scared self, to come in and say, it's okay, sweetheart. It's okay to be scared. Everyone gets scared, and that's normal. But it's not okay to hide from the things that scare you and not live your life. So when you bring in that self-compassion, you can also bring in the parenting self, and you can set boundaries to that scared inner child, and you can say, okay, sweetheart, you will face these fears because nothing bad is going to happen. I'm here, and you don't have to take center stage anymore. And you parent that inner child and give her firm boundaries so that she has her needs met, and she feels loved and supported, but she's not allowed to run the show because she's a child, and the parent comes in and does that. The parent can also help manage the inner critic and say, okay, you've got your opinion, but that's not okay to say those things. And this bullying, this being mean, this is all coming from a place of fear. So the parent, the adult, and the loving and compassionate self can help the inner critic to bring in compassion, to be kinder. And when you have a strong inner critic, I bet you don't talk to anybody else the way you talk to yourself. I bet you wouldn't dream of talking to anybody else the way you talk to yourself. I certainly would never, ever have done. And the person you get to spend the rest of your life with is you. So being mean and putting yourself down is just going to make you feel shit. So why not be nice? What's the worst thing that could happen? And yeah, it feels wrong to begin with. It feels fake. It feels uncomfortable. But it's a practice. And it's only by allowing ourselves to feel uncomfortable that we start to rewire our brains and we start to be able to change our circumstances, our situations. So bringing in other parts of yourself, bring in the fun and the play. What makes you happy? I invite you to journal that as well. When was the last time you did something that made you happy? When was the last time you did something for you? I never did stuff for me. I never did anything to make myself happy. In fact, I thought I deserved to be sad. I thought I deserved to be punished. Even when I had a massage, I used to go and have the most painful version of a massage possible because that was what I deserved. And now, I have amazing massages that are so relaxing and so lovely. And I regularly do kind things for myself, things that make me happy. I take myself off on solo dates to the cinema. I do so many things that make me happy. And when you look after yourself and treat yourself as you would treat a best friend and make yourself happy and do things to lift you up, your life really does start to change. And as I said to begin with, it does all feel uncomfortable, and that's completely normal. But it changes, and you get to change how your brain focuses on things. You get to look at things in a different way with practice. And this isn't a one and done. This is reminding yourself, reframing thoughts, practicing every single day, because to have change, you have to change things. So I just want you to know that you have got so many parts inside you that can step up and help probably the few parts that are running the show at the moment. And you can bring in these different parts. And if you find that you're trapped in this fear response, use your breath, ground yourself, notice what's around you, and then say to yourself, I've got other parts of me. There are other parts, and this scared self is less than 10% of me. This mean self is less than 10% of me. Let me bring in the other parts. Let me support myself through this. And you can also get support from other people, friends, family, therapists, a coach. I can support you. But there are so many different ways that you can use the strength that you have inside you and find that strength, because it's there. Honestly, it is there. If you're living in an eating disorder, you're already strong because you're living such a restricted life, and it takes so much strength to do that. So you get to turn that strength around. You get to use it to your advantage. And I know you can do this because you're a human being and you have all these parts inside you. So jot them down, look at them, be really curious. Notice as you go through your day which parts of you are on stage at different times. Who's playing the lead roles in your play? And who do you want to replace them with? Who do you want to give bigger parts to? I hope that's been helpful. And thank you so, so much for listening and for being a part of this incredible journey from recovery to discovery to living completely free and loving who you are. And that's what I want for each and every one of you. So I'm sending you all so much love, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening.